Well, Jill's brother, Nigel Dando, who is also in tonight's programme, joins me now. You've been asked to do this, I would imagine, a lot. You know, there's been a lot of documentaries and a lot of programmes over the years, but this kind of felt the right time to do it, I guess?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, there were times, particularly in the aftermath of the murder, where I was asked to do a lot of interviews, and I did what I could, but I was concerned that anything I might say might inadvertently prejudice the police inquiry. So, while I was being a journalist at the time, I knew why other journalists were speaking to me, or wanted to speak to me, but at the same time I knew that if I gave any interviews I might have to tread a little carefully, so as not to prejudice inadvertently, as I say, what the police were doing.
It is 20 years on. It's still got to be tough to relive all of that and to go back to how you were feeling at that time. You know, the rest of the nation was completely and utterly in shock, but for people who knew her and who loved her, that's a million times worse.
Yeah, it was a very difficult time, obviously, yeah, very difficult to come to terms with. To an extent it is now, 20 years on. But you can't live in the past. Personally, I can't become obsessive about it, and you have to move on. You never forget, but you have to move on.
There's been so many theories put forward because of the sheer senselessness of this. There's been so many theories. One was it was a professional hitman, a stalker. Do you have your own theory, or do you think that the whole kind of professional hitman thing is maybe a red herring, that it wasn't that?
I think, I mean, all avenues had to be investigated by the police.
Yeah.
And in the early days, who knew what it might be, and more importantly, what the motive might have been. But as the weeks have turned to months, and the months have turned to years, and the years have now turned to decades, and nobody has been convicted of Jill's murder, I tend to think that it wasn't a professional hit. Right. I think you can rule out the Serbian Hitman. That was a popular theory that was doing the rounds at the time. And for what it's worth, my belief is that it was just a misguided individual who was in that street on the day with a firearm, who knew where Jill lived, and who just struck lucky. For whatever reason that person was in that street, and for whatever reason that person did what that person did, I doubt that we'll ever know now because of the passage of time. But I just think it was a relatively random act. Somebody struck lucky because Jill's lifestyle at the time, she wasn't regularly at home.
Right, so there wasn't like, there was a routine that somebody would have known, and
you couldn't say that every Monday morning at 11 o'clock she would be there. On the day in question, she left her fiancé Alan's home in Chiswick and had briefly gone to her home in Fulham to pick something up, and then I think she was off somewhere else in London for fitting for her wedding dress, because of course they were going to get married shortly. So it was that random, you know. For what it's worth, and the police carried out an exhaustive check of CCTV as it existed then. They plotted Jill's journey. There were photographs. She wasn't obviously being followed or anything like that. A lot of phone calls. They were able to monitor a number of phone calls. Well, a number. It was literally thousands of phone calls that were being made in that area at the relevant time, and there was nothing that jumped out that suggested that, for example, Jill was being followed to her home that day. Neighbours talk of, you know, a strange man in the street, various descriptions of that person. Whether it was that person who pulled the trigger, guess we'll never know now.
Gosh, it's extraordinary. You think, I mean, the case is obviously still open.
Yes, I mean, it is. I don't know how the police would describe it. I think until a murder is solved, then it's never closed. But it's not an active inquiry at the moment. Although my understanding is that every few years they review the evidence and review anything fresh that's come in to see if there is an opportunity to formally reopen the investigation. And that's where we are with it at the moment.
That must be so hard, though, just not knowing. You know, especially someone like you, because you're a man that knows facts. You know, you're a journalist. You want to know what happened. Yeah,
well, more importantly, in this case, it is important that you know who did it. But to an extent, it's more important for me to know why. What was the motive?
It just doesn't make any sense, does it?
I'm not aware that Jill had any enemies at all.
No.
That she hadn't upset anybody. What you saw was what you got with Jill. She was very friendly. So, no, that's what, for 20 years, has baffled Jill's nearest and dearest, really. Why did it happen?
Well, especially to her. I mean, there's a woman who universally loved, a genuinely decent woman. I mean, nobody had a bad word to say about her.
I know.
She's planning her wedding.
Yes.
You know, her whole life is in front of her.
Yeah.
I mean, she was just, I feel as if she was just getting into her stride, you know, there was a huge career ahead of her.
Yeah, yeah. Well, a friend in the documentary that people watch it tonight, a friend of Jill, says she describes it as Jill as being, up career-wise, halfway up the mountain.
Yeah.
That she still had some way to go.
Yeah.
You know, you could say that she was at the peak of her broadcasting powers, but I tend to agree with that
so much more to
evaluation, that there was a lot more to come.
There definitely was.
Yeah.
Nigel, thank you for talking to us. I can't imagine what it's been like the past 20 years. And the documentary's on tonight, 9 o'clock, BBC One. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.